So we're going to talk about a place that really has two histories. One of them is celebrated, out in the open. But the other one, well, it's literally buried. And today we're going to do some digging.
Okay, so let's start with this. Just imagine for a second. You're a seagull, right? You're just soaring over the Israeli coast somewhere between Tel Aviv and Haifa. And down below you, you see this place called Dor. It's a gorgeous resort. Soft sand, coral reefs, hotels that look like they could be right out of Florida. Absolutely picturesque.
But this perfect picture, it's got a crack in it. See, back in 1991, a developer decided to build a new diving center there. Sounds nice, right? Well, as the workers started digging, their machines hit something they definitely didn't expect. Human bones. Just buried, not very deep at all. And just like that, the project was stopped. The site was filled back in, and those workers, they never came back.
So you've got this abandoned project, a discovery that gets hushed up pretty quick. It makes you wonder, right? What in the world was buried beneath the sand of this beautiful beach resort? Well, the answer really starts with a name change. Because before this place was called Dor, it was a Palestinian fishing village, and it was called Tantura. The secret? It's all in the story of how one became the other.
And when you look at the then versus the now, the difference is just stark. I mean, back in 1948, Tantura was this quiet little community, maybe 1,500 people, mostly living off fishing and farming. But today, it's a bustling tourist hub. The key to this whole thing is figuring out what happened in between.
So for about 50 years, the official story was pretty simple. There was a battle in Tantura during the 1948 war. That's it. But that whole narrative just got completely shattered in 1998. And it was all because of a master's thesis from a student at the University of Haifa named Teddy Katz. What did he do? For his research, he actually went and interviewed former Israeli soldiers from the Alexandroni Brigade. These were the very men who entered that village.
And according to the testimonies Katz gathered, what happened there was not a battle. This event is what Palestinians call the Nakba, which means the catastrophe. The villagers' resistance, it was over almost before it began. And what came next was systematic. Men and women were separated. The women were robbed of their valuables and then forced out. And the men and boys, some as young as 13, were marched down to the beach. And the soldiers' own words, the ones documented in Katz's research, are just chilling. One of them talked about watching another soldier, someone who would go on to become a pretty high-ranking official, just execute captives, methodically, with his pistol, one after another.
And you have to remember, these aren't testimonies from the victims, this is coming from the perpetrators. One soldier, a guy named Ahmed Sir Cohen, is quoted saying it just plainly. The report even says he was laughing when he said it. "I was a murderer, I didn't take prisoners."
Okay, so when someone asked him how many he killed, his answer, it just gives you a sense of the scale of the violence that's really hard to wrap your head around. He said, "I didn't count. I had a machine gun with 250 bullets, and I finished them."
So all these testimonies clearly pointed to mass graves. But where were they? Fast forward decades later to 2023, and a research agency called Forensic Architecture starts an investigation. They wanted to see if they could use modern tech to pinpoint the exact locations. And how they did it is actually pretty fascinating. What they did was they took aerial photos of Tantura from 1946, before all this happened, and they compared them with photos from 1949, right after. By looking for disturbances in the ground, they could actually spot areas that looked like someone had dug large pits.
And this right here, this is the core of our story. Because their investigation concluded that one of the largest mass graves is located directly underneath the parking lot of the modern Dor Beach Resort, the exact same spot where tourists park their cars to go to the beach today.
A mass grave under a beach parking lot? That's more than just a hidden crime scene. The source we're looking at argues that this story, the story of Tantura, isn't just some isolated incident. It's actually a direct challenge to what it calls the founding myths of Israel's national story.
Okay, so let's look at the first myth it talks about. It's that old idea of a land without people for a people without a land. The official narrative, as the source describes it, kind of paints this picture of settlers arriving to find this desolate land full of swamps. But the counter-narrative it presents is totally different. It talks about a vibrant, functioning society that already had thousands of named locations, and where the strategy wasn't just about development, but about displacement.
All right, the second myth this source takes on is the idea that Zionism is the same thing as Judaism.
It says that while the national story often frames Zionism as this ancient religious dream, it was actually a modern, secular, political ideology, something that came out of 19th century Europe as a response to anti-Semitism. The argument here is that religious themes were used strategically, kind of to sell the whole project to a European Jewish population that was, believe it or not, pretty skeptical at first.
So that leads to a pretty big question, right? If these counter-narratives exist, why don't more people know about them? Well, the source argues that's not an accident, that there's been a real systematic effort to suppress them.
And according to the source, the consequences for people who challenge the official story can be pretty severe. Take Teddy Katz, the student who first broke the Tantura story. He was sued by the veterans, his thesis was withdrawn, and his academic career was basically destroyed. The source also points to others, like the historian Ilan Pape and Aya Wiseman from Forensic Architecture, saying they've faced similar things, from getting pushed out of their university jobs to even having their books banned.
And this suppression, the source claims, is even written into law. It points to a 2011 law, often called the Nakba Law, which apparently gives the government the power to pull funding from any state-supported institution. We're talking universities, schools, if they acknowledge or commemorate the Nakba as a catastrophe.
And all of this really brings us back to a huge central question. From the bones buried under a tourist parking lot to the laws that shape what can be taught in schools, this whole story really makes you ask, when you have two completely different histories for the exact same piece of land, who gets to decide which one is told and which one gets buried?